Today we are going to discuss spiritual friend, the kalyana mitta in Theravada Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is the teaching of Lord Gautama Buddha, who lived and taught in northern India in the 6th and 5th century before Christ. The Buddha gained enlightenment as a Samma Sambuddha while he was meditating under a tree in Bodh Gaya, India. And through meditation, he realized the Four Noble Truths and the path of liberation from suffering. Having gained enlightenment as a Samma Sambuddha, the Buddha decided to teach it to others so that they too can liberate themselves from suffering. So the Buddha traveled to Varanasi in India and delivered his very first sermon called Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, meaning turning of the wheel of truth, to 5 previous ascetic companions who had supported him during his struggle to gain enlightenment. The Four Noble Truths that the Buddha realized and described in his first sermon are the truth of suffering, that there is universal suffering in the world, the truth of the origin of suffering. The cause of suffering is craving in various forms. The truth of the cessation of suffering. The suffering can be eradicated by eradicating craving of various forms. And the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So the fourth noble truth is the path leading to the end of suffering. And the Buddha described that as the Noble Eightfold Path. This Noble Eightfold Path provides practical steps that can be followed, cultivated, in order to attain enlightenment and liberation from suffering. There are 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path: right view, samadhi; right intention, samma sankappa; right speech, samma vacha; right action, samma kammanta; right livelihood, samma ajiva; right effort, samma vayama; right mindfulness, samma sati; and right concentration, samma samadhi. From a practical standpoint, these 8 factors are divided into 3 groups of practice. The first group is morality, sila, and that consists of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. The second group is concentration, samadhi, and that consists of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And the third group is wisdom, panya, and that consists of right understanding and right intention. So by cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path diligently and successfully, one can attain enlightenment and Nibbana. And the state of Nibbana is the supramundane state of the highest bliss and happiness, And it's also complete freedom from suffering, freedom from birth, disease, old age, death, grief, lamentation, despair, and any other form of suffering. And when one attains Nibbana, one has also escaped from the cycle of rebirth and death with no more rebirth. So, according to Buddhist teaching, the only path to attain Nibbana and to attain complete liberation from suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. And Nibbana can be attained by any disciple who cultivates the path seriously as instructed by the Buddha. The final goal of any Theravada Buddhist practitioner is to attain Nibbana and liberate from suffering. But one has to do it by oneself. No one else can do it. Not even the Buddha or any other superior being can save another from suffering. In the verse 160 of the Dhammapada, there's a book of Buddha's sayings in verse form. The Buddha has said, Attahi attano nato kohi nato parosya. Oneself indeed is one's savior. Oh, what other savior would there be? However, the Buddha has also emphasized the significance of having a spiritual friend or a noble friend, kalyana mitta, during one's spiritual journey towards liberation. In a discourse called Upadda Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, that's a collection of Buddha's connected discourses. It says that once Venerable Ananda, the Buddha's chief attendant, went to the Buddha and they made a statement. Sir, I believe spiritual friendship is half of one's spiritual life. And the Buddha said, no, spiritual life is the whole of spiritual journey. And Buddha also said, when a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades, he can be expected to develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So a spiritual friend is called a kalyana mitta in the Pali language. Kalyana means lovely or beautiful, and mitta means friend. Now, beautiful here is not the physical appearance, but it refers to positive qualities of conviction, loving kindness, compassion, virtue, generosity, and wisdom. Several other terms are also used to describe a spiritual friend, such as admirable friend, virtuous friend, good friend, benevolent friend, ideal friend, wise friend, and noble friend. Now, the disciples of the Buddha belongs to four groups: Buddhist monks, bhikkhus, Buddhist nuns, bhikkhunis, male disciples, upasaka, and female lay disciples, upasika. A spiritual friend or kalyana mitta can be equally beneficial to all of them. because when one has a spiritual friend, one learns from the spiritual friend, maintains virtuous and wholesome practice, and also cultivate good qualities. In a discourse called the Maha Mangala Sutta, the Buddha has described 38 great blessings in life that can lead to material and spiritual success. And the first of the 38 great blessings are to avoid associating with unwise people and to associate with the wise people. Buddha said, Asevanacha balanam panditanancha sevana. Not to associate with the unwise, to associate with the wise. And there are many benefits from association with a wise person. In another discourse called Vyaggapadja Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, there's a collection of the Buddha's numerical discourses. A householder called Digajanu went to the Buddha and requested the Buddha to describe any qualities that can lead to one's success and well-being in the world. And the Buddha describes 4 such qualities. The first is accomplishment of persistent effort, uttana sampada. The second is accomplishment of vigilance on one's possessions, arakka sampada. And the third quality is having good spiritual friendships, kalyana, mitta. And the fourth quality is to have a balanced livelihood, samajivi kata. In the same discourse, the Buddha described 4 qualities of a spiritual friend. A spiritual friend will develop ethical, moral, virtuous life and encourage others also to develop a moral, ethical, and virtuous life. A spiritual friend will develop conviction, saddha, in the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching, and will also encourage others to develop conviction, saddha in the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching. A spiritual friend will practice generosity, giving gifts and offerings to others, and will also encourage others to develop the quality of generosity. A spiritual friend will develop wisdom and will also encourage others to develop wisdom. In another discourse called Meghiya Sutta of Udana, that is one of the 15 books of the Khuddaka Nikaya, collection of the Buddha's minor discourses, a monk called Meghiya, who happened to be the Buddha's attendant at that time, went to a nice park and sat down to meditate. But he could not meditate successfully because his mind was bombarded by unwholesome thoughts. And then he went to the Buddha and requested the Buddha to advise him how to meditate properly so that he can succeed. And the Buddha described 5 qualities that will help one to meditate and progress in the spiritual journey. And the first quality is spiritual friendship. Second, virtuous behavior. Third, listening to profitable good talk. Fourth, effort to abandon unwholesome qualities and to develop wholesome qualities. And the fifth is to develop wisdom into impermanence of all conditioned phenomena. And the Buddha said in the same discourse that if you have spiritual friendship, a kalyana mitta, that will help one to develop virtuous behavior. That will help one to develop the opportunities to listen to profitable talk. That will help one to develop effort to abandon unwholesome qualities and to develop wholesome qualities. And that will also help one to develop wisdom into impermanence of all conditioned phenomena. In another discourse called Dutiya Seka Sutta of Itivuttaka, that's another book of the Khuddaka Nikaya, collection of the Buddha's minor discourses. Buddha said that for someone in spiritual training towards the final goal of liberation from suffering, the Buddha could not see any other external factor which is more important than having a spiritual friendship with a spiritual friend. And the Buddha also said, a monk who is a friend with admirable people abandons what is unskillful and develop what is skillful. Bhikkhu Bodhi, a Buddhist scholar, has described two types of spiritual friendships. First is horizontal spiritual friendship, and the second, vertical spiritual friendship. Now, horizontal friendship is between disciples who are at about the same level of spiritual progress, working together, having a common aspirations. They get together to listen to Buddha's teaching, to observe moral precepts, to have Dhamma discussions, and engage in other spiritual practices together. Vertical spiritual friendship is between those at different levels of spiritual progress. It could be as senior and junior disciples or as a teacher and student. And obviously, teacher, a mentor, or any other advisor is naturally more experienced with regard to Buddha's teaching and Dhamma practice. Now, Lord Gautama Buddha, of course, is the supreme spiritual friend. The Buddha had all the qualities of a spiritual friend. A long time ago, he had the opportunity and the ability to gain enlightenment and escape from all suffering and the cycle of birth and death. But instead of that, he decided to become a Samma Sambuddha and help others to liberate themselves and struggle for a very, very long time to be born in this life and become a Samma Sambuddha. And as a Samma Sambuddha, he discovered the path of liberation and taught it to others with no discrimination at all, so that they could also liberate themselves from suffering. And once the Buddha said, it is in dependence on me as an admirable friend that beings gain release from suffering. So who else can be a spiritual friend? When the Buddha was alive, obviously the Buddha was there, and there were numerous enlightened arahants, both Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns. And there were also lay disciples who learned in the Buddha's teaching and had progressed in the Buddhist spiritual path of liberation. But at the present time, that is 26 centuries later, we don't know whether there are any enlightened people. And even if there are, we don't know how to identify them. So any of the Buddha's disciples, Buddhist monks, Buddhist nuns, male lay disciples or female disciples, with certain qualities can be a spiritual friend. And they should have qualities such as a virtuous, ethical, moral behavior, conviction in the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching, be generous, and possess wisdom. They should also have compassion, patience, understandings, perseverance, and high integrity. A spiritual friend should have the ability to constructively criticize and advise a person whenever it is necessary. For example, if there is a moral distraction or lack of effort, or there is a tendency to give up easily. But in criticizing and advising, the sole intention is to help the person to rectify the weakness and to progress in the spiritual path. Our spiritual friend should also have a good knowledge and understanding of the Buddha's teaching, and obviously should be willing to teach, advise, and counsel others. The spiritual friend should have experience in sharing and teaching the Buddha's doctrine, and also personal experience in practicing the Buddhist meditative techniques. And the spiritual friend should have concern for spiritual welfare of others with no expectations of any personal rewards. In verse 76 of the Dhammapada, Buddha stated the value of associating a spiritual friend who can recognize someone's weakness and give constructive advice. Buddha said, if there is a person like that, one should follow such a noble person like following a guide to a hidden treasure. And also in verse 208 of the Dhammapada, the Buddha advised others to follow a spiritual friend with high qualities, like the moon following the path of the stars. Now, of course, mere association with a spiritual friend is not enough to gain real benefit from that relationship. One must learn from them. One should try and recognize their positive qualities and cultivate those qualities within oneself. And whenever it is necessary, one should be able to consult and seek advice and clarifications from the spiritual friend. And one should be prepared to work earnestly with diligence to eradicate all mental defilements and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddhist path of liberation from suffering and the cycle of birth and death, samsara. Thank you very much.